Hi, it's me again, Janelle, and I will be doing today's Bible reading for us today. So today's talk is from Leviticus chapter 25. I'm going to read Leviticus chapter 25 from verses 8 to 17. You might like to open that in your Bible now. It'll also be on the slides for you to follow along. Count 7 Sabbath years, 7 times 7 years, so that the 7 Sabbath years amount to a period of 49 years. Then sound the trumpet everywhere on the 10th day of the 7th month. On the Day of Atonement, sound the trumpet throughout your land. Consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you. Each of you is to return to your family property and to your own clan. The 50th year shall be a jubilee for you. Do not sow and do not reap what grows of itself, or harvest the untended vines. For it is a jubilee and is to be holy for you. Eat only what is taken directly from the fields. In this year of Jubilee, everyone is to return to their own property. If you sell land to any of your own people or buy land from them, do not take advantage of each other. You are to buy from your own people on the basis of the number of years since the Jubilee, and they are to sell to you on the basis of the number of years left for harvesting crops. When the years are many, you are to increase the price, and when the years are few, you are to decrease the price, because what is really being sold to you is the number of crops. Do not take advantage of each other, but fear your God. I am the Lord your God.
Great to see you here at the EU public meeting. My name is Rowan Kemp. I lead the staff team that work alongside the EU. What an absolutely bonkers part of the Bible. Did you actually think about what that says? Reread it to yourself and then talk to the person next to you about why that's plain bonkers. Read it, chat about it. What's bonkers about it? Call it out to me. What strikes you as absolutely bonkers about this little section when it comes to property ownership? Any suggestions? I'll take any suggestions. Yeah, go on. Have a crack. Yeah. It's more a lease rather than a sale. What does someone think about that? Like, what, you got any comment, or someone who had a similar idea? You can build on that idea. What stands out to you? Yeah.
You don't actually own your land if you buy it.
Because in this year of Jubilee, every 50 years, the land reverts back to the person you bought it from. So if it happens to be that the year of Jubilee is in 3 years' time and I buy property off you, I'm to negotiate the price based on the fact that in 3 years' time, I've got to give it back to you. So it's just a low price. But if it's 47 years to the Jubilee, then maybe the price is higher because I get the land for all of those years. So this is setting land price not based on proximity to the beach, this is setting land price based on a year, like proximity to this particular year of Jubilee, which rolls around every 50 years. What does that make you think? Just as I've sort of just explained that just a little bit, just any random thought that comes into your mind about that, apart from that's bonkers. Anything? What does it make you think?
Ruins the speculative property market.
It ruins the speculative property market. Solves our housing crisis. Yes, maybe this is the answer, maybe. I mean, when I was sharing it with a student this week, that was their immediate response. Oh, maybe this could solve the housing crisis. And then they came back with an even more interesting insight. They said, oh, but then in Australia, who does the land belong to? Oh, maybe this solves Indigenous reconciliation. Maybe this. What do we do with this part of the Bible? We're jumping into this particular section of Leviticus chapter 25 and 26, which talks about this year of Jubilee. But to get our sort of orientation, we're going to start by asking a couple of just questions, sort of to remind ourselves of some truths from last week. First of all, last week I talked about there's one big issue in the book of Leviticus. One big issue. What's the big issue? Anyone remember from last week? What's the big issue in the book of Leviticus? Helps you when you're reading it. The big issue is... Thank you. How can a holy God, there is after all only one God in the world and he is holy, 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 according to Isaiah 6, right? How can the holy God dwell amongst an unholy people? That's the big question. And Leviticus is the answer to that question. And the answer is encoded in the very structure of the book. Because you might remember last week that the book has this sandwich in and out type structure where the beginning and ends are sort of balanced all the way in. And the point of this sandwich structure is that what's in the middle of the sandwich is the most important part. And what's at the very heart of the book of Leviticus? Turns out it's what we know as chapter 16, this Day of Atonement ritual. The ritual that the one true living God gave his people, the Israelites, to make them holy, to bring about atonement, at-one-ment between him and his unholy people. It's to make atonement for their sins so that they might be holy and then he can live in their midst. The Day of Atonement ritual stands at the very centre of the big issue in the book of Leviticus, and the rest of the book helps them understand how they're now to live as his holy people. God makes them holy, he holifies them with the Day of Atonement ritual, and now they have the instructions about how to live as his holy people. So that helps us a little bit understand what is this stuff in Leviticus chapter 25, 26 about. Okay, it's about instructions for them to live holy practices. How to live as his holy people with following these particular holy practices. But if you look at the section, chapter 23 through to chapter 27, you can break that down a little bit more. It sort of breaks down like this. If you've got it in front of you, chapter 23 is about various festivals. There's a weekly festival. Question without notice for you. What's the weekly festival that the Jews still observe to this day? Not a hard question, super easy. Sabbath, thank you. Yes, right. So chapter 23 starts out by talking about the Sabbath day. Then it talks about annual festivals, like the time frame gets longer. Annual festivals, things that you're meant to do throughout the year. Chapter 24 is about perpetual rituals, things that don't happen weekly, things that happen daily, as well as then some things that happen weekly. And then chapters 25 and 26, which is where we're looking at, the time frame elongates again, and it's about special years that they are to observe. Does that make sense? So the whole package together is talking about various ways that they're to recognise that they are God's holy people in this temporal framework. What you're to do weekly, what you're to do daily, what you're to do annually, what you're to do in special years. Does that make sense? That's where we're at in the book. So what we want to do is think about the special years. But it's worth looking at this whole section because chapter 23 starts with the weekly celebration, the Sabbath, and chapter 25 starts with not a Sabbath day, but a Sabbath year that they're to observe every 7 years. There seems to be some sort of connection here. A weekly Sabbath, and if you read the beginning of chapter 23, you'll see that it's a weekly Sabbath for God's people. And chapter 25, every 7 years they're to have a Sabbath year for the land. One of the things when you're reading the Bible is you've got to pay attention to the details. You've got to pay attention to the little details. Some people have been saying to me about Leviticus, because we're doing it in PMs, I've decided that I'm going to read through the book of Leviticus this year, which is a great thing to do. But some people say, when you read it, it feels repetitive. I feel like I'm just reading just the same stuff over and over and over again. Well, I want to suggest to you, there is very little repetition in the book of Leviticus. Very little. It seems maybe to be repetitious if you're not paying attention to the details of what's said. But if you read the details carefully, you'll see actually it's addressing a whole bunch of related but different situations that together forms quite a comprehensive law code by which they were to organise their lives, to live as God's holy people. So what you need to do is to read carefully. So let's jump in to chapter 25 and let's think about, first of all, this Sabbath year. Before we get to the year of Jubilee, the Sabbath year. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to read in detail, something just really carefully. Apply your tertiary educated brains to sort of a little bit of textual analysis. Okay, so open up to Leviticus chapter 25. Leviticus chapter 25, maybe call it up on your phone, open up your Bible, maybe look on with the person next to you. I'm going to read the first 7 verses, which is about this Sabbath year. And I'm going to tell you in advance what the question is that you need to try to answer, right? The question is this. In the Sabbath year, where do I get my food from? Right? In the Sabbath year, that's just the question. It'll make sense as we read it. In the Sabbath year, where do I get my food from? All right? Okay, let's have a read of it. Leviticus chapter 25, verse 1. The Lord said to Moses on Mount Sinai, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you enter the land I am going to give you, the land itself must observe a Sabbath to the Lord. For 6 years sow your fields, and for 6 years prune your vineyards and gather their crops. But in the 7th year, the land is to have a Sabbath of rest, a Sabbath to the Lord. Do not sow your fields or prune your vineyards. Do not reap what grows of itself or harvest the grapes of your untended vines. The land is to have a year of rest. Whatever the land yields during the Sabbath year will be food for you, for yourself, your manservant, your maidservant, and the hired worker and the temporary resident who live among you, as well as for your livestock and the wild animals in your land. Whatever the land produces may be eaten." I want you to pay careful attention to what you're not to do and what you are to do, and the question is, where do you get your food from in the Sabbath year? Have a read and have a chat to the person next to you. What do you think the answer is? Okay, so we'll start with an easy question. The easy question is, why is that a bit of a tricky question? Where do I get my food from? Why, when you read the actual verses, why is that a little bit of a tricky question? Where do I get my food from? Tell me why that's a tricky question, a little bit. Yeah?
It feels like a bit of a contradiction. It says not to reap or harvest, but then it also says to eat the food.
Yes, it feels like a bit of a contradiction. It's saying whatever the land produces, but then you're not like what. That's right. That's exactly why it feels contradictory. It's not. It's not contradictory. It makes perfect sense if you read it carefully. So the problem is reading the Bible is not like a reel, right? If I watch a reel, it's meant to make sense to me, right? If you watch a reel and you go, "Oh, I didn't understand that. I need to watch that 7 more times to make sense." No, they're very obvious, right? But also, the Bible is not a Christopher Nolan movie, right? If you watch Tenet, one of my favourite movies of all time, I've watched it 3 times in my life so far. I still don't really know what the heck's going on. And I think by the time I die and Jesus takes me to glory, maybe I'll know what's going on, or I'll just ask Jesus when I get there. The Bible is not too hard to understand, and it's not so superficial that I don't need to engage my brain. God's given you a brain and He's given you His word. If you apply your brain, you can understand the text. You've just got to actually read it. Okay? So, what am I meant to eat in the Sabbath year? What was your suggestion? Have a crack. Be bold. Yeah.
Is there a difference between talking about the fields and the vineyards of that specific person and the land more generally?
Yes, there probably is some distinction between what's the land more generally and the fields that belong to a particular person. In particular, it says, don't eat what just grows of itself. You know what that's like. If you're composting and then out of the compost randomly grows this tomato plant because there was some seed that was in the and it just randomly grew by itself. You didn't plant it just grew. It's saying in the Sabbath year, don't eat what just grows of itself. Leave that alone. Okay, that's one thing it's saying. It's also saying not to do a couple of things. It says don't plant, don't sow, right, which is what you do for seeds. If you want crops next year, you plant a seed. The other thing you do, if you want your vines to produce grapes next year, you don't plant seeds. What do? You prune it. That's how you make vines grow. You either plant a seed for a crop or you prune a vineyard. And it's saying don't do those 2 things. And then it also says, because it knows that the heart of the human being is sinful, it also says, and by the way, don't go and just take the grapes off casually off your vine. Oh, I'm not pruning. I'm just taking the grapes off. Because taking the grapes off effectively prunes the vine. So it's saying you don't prune your vines, don't take the grapes off, don't plant the seed, but what are you allowed to do? You're allowed to harvest from your crops. not from your vines, but you're allowed to harvest. It doesn't say don't harvest. It says actually you should eat what the land produces of itself. But what you've not done is plant seed for next year. What you've not done is prune your vines for next year. So actually, it's no problem working out what you're going to eat in the Sabbath year. When's the problem year going to be? The next year. That's all right. God's got that covered. He knows that's an issue. Look later in the chapter, verse 18. Here's God's solution to that problem. Follow my decrees and be careful to obey my laws, and you will live safely in the land. Then the land will yield its fruit, and you will eat your fill and live there in safety. And you're going, yeah, but what about that? What about that year after the Sabbath? I mean, what about that? And he says, verse 20, you may ask, what will we eat in the 7th year if we do not plant or harvest our crops? I will send you such a blessing in the 6th year that the land will yield enough for 3 years. While you plant during the 8th year, you will eat from the old crop and will continue to eat from it until the harvest of the 9th year comes in. So what's the answer? He's going to give you such an overabundance in the 6th year that's going to carry you all the way through until you can reap in the 9th year. No problem. All you've got to do is trust God. And some of you you're smiling, going, yeah, that's easy said, hard to do. That's right. What does it also make you think? When else, does that just sort of, if you know your Old Testament, does it just make you think of anything else? An abundance in year 6 to carry you through? Like, does it make you think of anything? Yeah. What? Sorry, what? Sorry, what? What was it?
The manna in the desert.
Yeah, I'm making a theological dad joke there and no one's getting it. Why is that a theological dad joke? You've just worked it out, right?
I think I am getting it.
Yeah, you think you're getting it. That is right, yeah. And you did well. Thank you for putting up with that. Yeah. Someone said to me, you've got to be careful about that. People might get offended. So thank you. You're doing really well. That is, you know the story about manna? What's the story about manna in the desert? When the Israelites rescued out of slavery by God, they're out there in the desert and they start complaining, what are we going to eat? What does God do? Not hard. Gives them manna, right? Which is what? It's like this bready substance that appears on the ground. They walk out in the morning and there's manna on the ground. The first time they ever see it, they walk out of their tents and go, manna? Like, because manna means what? That's why I'm going, what? I told you it was a theological dad joke. Right, yeah. They look at the manna and go, what is that? And God provided manna every day for 40 years until they reached the promised land and could finally plant their crops. 40 years, daily provision. Because if they gathered too much manna and tried to hold some over to the next day, it went bad and they couldn't eat it. So they were forced to live daily dependence on God, except because the Sabbath, on the 7th day, they were told to do no work and gathering manna was work. God gave them a double portion on the 6th day, so they held it over and it didn't go bad. Every other day of the week it would go bad, but it wouldn't go bad when they held it over to the Sabbath. So what's happening here? When they get to the promised land, they're to start doing a Sabbath year every 7 years. It's basically their same manna experience is going to continue on even when they get into the promised land by observing this Sabbath year. It's saying, you don't stop trusting me when you reach the promised land. In fact, it's going to be even bigger. For a whole year, you won't plant, but I will provide an abundance. So what's the significance of the Sabbath year? Well, the first thing is that I think it's a continuation, maybe even an elevation or escalation of their manna experience, learning to trust God's provision. But there's a second thing too. Remember, there's the Sabbath year, rest for the land, and Sabbath day, rest for God's people. Now, the Sabbath day is there in the Ten Commandments, and the Ten Commandments are listed twice in the Old Testament law. It's there in Exodus 20 and in Deuteronomy 5. Both times the Sabbath day command is given a different rationale, a different explanation. In Deuteronomy 5, they're to remember the Sabbath day each week as a way of remembering that God rescued them out of slavery in Egypt. It looks back to them being rescued. But in Exodus chapter 20, they're told to observe the Sabbath day because God rested on the seventh day. You know, from Genesis chapter 1 and 2, God created all things. On the seventh day he rests. Not because he's tired, he rests because rest is the goal of his creation. He created everything. He looks at it all and says, it's all very good, and he enjoys it. That's the rest. So God's people were to observe a Sabbath day to remember his rescue of them. He's rescued them to enjoy the rest. So the Sabbath day looks backwards and forwards. The Sabbath year, my little theory is, the Sabbath year was doing something similar. It looks back and it looks forward. What is it about giving the land? Why does the land need a rest? Now, some people say, oh, well, see, God is so wise. He just knows how to... He cared about sustainability for the creation. And it's here even in the Old Testament. Sustainable farming practices. We should all give the land a rest every 7... It's just that nowhere in the Bible is that actually said, that that's the reason. Trying to think about it in biblical terms, I wonder whether the land getting a rest is to point backwards and forwards like the Sabbath day pointed backwards and forwards. And what does it point backwards to? It points backwards to, well, originally when God created things, it wasn't corrupted by sin, but because of human sin, the land itself in Genesis 3 has been cursed. The land itself, according to Romans 8, has been subjected to futility. The land is not as God would have it be. The very creation itself. And so in the Sabbath year, the land gets to have rest. It's not toiled at by humanity. It's not worked at by humanity. And that's in a little way pointing back to the problem, but also in a way pointing forward to one day God will fix all things in creation. Romans chapter 8 talks about how creation has been subjected to futility and longs for the moment of the revealing of the glory of the children of God. Because when Jesus returns and we are resurrected as his people in glory, then he will renew all of the very creation itself. So I wonder if that Sabbath year was somehow pointing backwards and forwards. Just a little theological kite that I'm flying. You might like to talk about that later. So that's the Sabbath year. And you think, okay, that's pretty interesting, I guess. But then every 7 Sabbaths years, see, maths is helpful, maths is in the Bible. 7 sevens are, if you didn't know, the Bible gives you the answer, 49, it tells you. 49 years, and then you have the 50th year. And we read these verses from Leviticus chapter 25 about the year of Jubilee. Notice a couple of things in this passage from verses 10 to 12. First of all, it talks about rest. The same sort of command that we just read about the Sabbath year. So in the 49th year, that will be a Sabbath year. The 50th, you do another Sabbath year, a double Sabbath year. What was God going to do? That's all right, God will provide. That's what we've learned over the 50 years, right? God provides every 7 years. He can do a double Sabbath year. So there's rest. But also, notice here, the 50th year is special because it proclaims liberty. Liberty for who? Liberty for 2 things. It's about a return to your traditional family properties and release if you are a slave or you are in sort of bonded labour or hired sort of labour to somebody else. The story goes like this. If in the land you got really poor, like you just had a really bad time and you could no longer sustain yourself, then what you might do is sell off some of the family property to someone else. That's fine, you can do that, says God, according to these laws. However, if then down the track you came into some more money, or your relative came into some more money, you are allowed to buy back, to redeem the bit of land you sold. But even if you never get the money to redeem it, when the 50th year rolls around, it's just returned to you anyway. It's like a reset. It's like every 50 years, things go back to as they originally were, because when they go into the promised land, God gives every tribe, every clan, every family a particular portion of land. And every 50 years, it returns to that original setting. Similarly, if you got really poor, you might have sold off your land, you're still in real need. What do? Well, there's stuff in the chapter about if you see one of God's people struggling like that, you should help them out. But if they get in such a spot, they might sell themselves or be tempted to sell themselves as a slave. Well, God's people are not to make slaves of each other, you can read in the chapter, but they might give themselves as a hired worker. So I go to David and I say, David, I've completely just take me on as a worker. It's the only way I can provide my family. Take me on as a worker. And so David graciously takes me on as a worker. And again, if you read the chapter, if I then come into some money, I can redeem myself out of his service. Or if a family member gets some money, they can redeem me out of his service. Or if I can't do that, by the time the 50th year rolls around, David's just to let me go anyway. So you see what's going on here? It's a reset. Everything goes back to as it originally was. So, two things to take away from this. First of all, throughout the chapter, it's made very clear that the reason of this crazy bonkers system is because it makes the point which was made before, that you don't really own the land. It's God's land. And you don't own people. We all belong to God. And so the land and its people belong to the Lord. And we've received it as a gift from him. That's why there's sort of no permanent transfer of ownership here. Makes me remember Psalm 24 verse 1, where we read there, the psalmist says, the earth, the whole earth, is the Lord's, and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. What ancient Israel were doing, they were demonstrating this truth to the rest of the world. No other country had such a crazy bonkers system. But what does this crazy bonkers system say? It says, the land's not ours, the land belongs to our God. And we all belong to our God. We're his servants. In fact, it's true for all of you as well. Your land belongs to him and you all belong to him, but you don't realise that, but we're living out that truth as a sign to you. It's a sign to us, actually, reading about what went on there. It's because we so easily forget that we and all of our stuff belongs to the Lord. Whose phone is it that you've got in your pocket or sitting in front of you or holding in your hand? Whose phone is it? It's your phone. No. Whose phone is it? Whose phone is it? It's God's phone. Isn't that what that verse is telling you? It's God's phone. Does that change how you use your phone? Knowing that it's actually God's phone? I mean, if God reached down and gave you a phone and says, hey, I see you need a phone, are you going to be a bit more careful about where you go on that phone? Maybe. It's God's phone. Whose car is it that you drive? My dad's car, my mum's car, my sister's car. Any car I find, I go get. Like whatever it is. No, whatever car you drive, it's God's car, not your car. The earth and everything in it, everyone in it belongs to the Lord. And ancient Israel were living out that truth in a very concrete sort of way. That's the first thing. Second thing, as I made clear, it was a generational reset. Every 50 years, the whole thing would go back to as God originally intended it when they walked into the land. 50 years, probably that meant that almost every Israelite experienced it at some point. This generational reset, back to God's intention, lived out in a concrete way. Okay, so that's lots about Leviticus. In my final 3 minutes, here I go. What does God want us to do with these laws today? Okay, first thing to say is this. Jesus has ended the Old Testament law code. As a code in which, to say, if you want to be God's holy people, you live like this. Jesus has repealed, technical word, has cancelled out the Old Testament law code. God does not expect Christians to live by those laws anymore. He's repealed it. They don't apply. However, you remember from last week, the Old Testament, including the law, is prophecy that always points forward to Jesus. So I'll finish with this little story. When Israelites get into the promised land, they ignore God's commands, including the command to observe the Sabbath years and the year of Jubilee. They ignore it. Consequently, they end up going into exile. They get kicked out of the land. But God gives them a promise. He says, one day, if you repent, I will bring you back, and it will be like Super Jubilee. It'll be like Jubilee on steroids. You can look it up later. He doesn't use that word, but you look up later, Isaiah 61, and it says, it'll be the year of the Lord's favour, and you will receive a double portion in the land, and you'll have other people who will work your land for you. Like it's like Super Jubilee. So Israelites are waiting for this, and one day there's this carpenter dude, this carpenter who goes into a synagogue in Nazareth where he grew up, and they give him the scroll of the prophet Isaiah. He opens it to Isaiah 61, reads out about this Super Jubilee. He gives it back. He sits down. He says to everybody, today, this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing. He says, I, Jesus, am bringing in the promised Super Jubilee. And if you go ahead and you read Colossians, in the New Testament we read, therefore do not let anyone judge you by what you eat or drink or with regard to a religious festival, a new moon celebration or a Sabbath day, because that's been repealed. These are a shadow of the things that are to come. The reality is found in Christ. Jesus introduces the true Jubilee, of which all of this stuff is just a shadow. And what is that? Jesus introduces the eternal rest. You can have rest for your soul. Jesus introduces the fundamental release from slavery to sin and slavery to the fear of death. Jesus introduces the final return, resurrection bodies, living in Jesus' presence in the new creation. That's the reality to which all of this stuff were just shadows. Jesus introduces the ultimate, final year of Jubilee. See you next week.
Thanks for listening to today's talk. The Evangelical Union, or EU, is a student club on campus at Sydney University that seeks to proclaim Jesus Christ as Lord. To join us or to find out more, please visit sydneyunieu.org.